In most years, an election in suburban St. Louis wouldn't attract much attention. But it was national news earlier this year when Ella Jones was elected mayor and sworn in Ferguson, Missouri.
So help me God.
I give you a big hug. Congratulations.
The reason this got so much attention is that Jones is the first African American mayor of Ferguson, the place that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement after the 2014 killing of Michael Brown by a Ferguson police officer. Those events 6 years ago led to the forming of a special commission which put out a report outlining 189 policy recommendations, actionable solutions to racial inequities in our region. And people are still working on those, working for change.
I'm the executive director and lead strategy catalyst at Forward Through Ferguson. It's going to be hard to get towards racial equity, to achieve those policies, those really important steps towards justice, but we have to be ready for that journey. 6 years after the killing of Michael Brown, that really traumatizing incident for so many people across our region, aside from the tragedy for that family, it's about time that we actually invest in these things and that our corporate leaders, our political leaders across the region are taking up those calls to action and implementing them. They have the power to do it.
Michael Brown was one turning point, George. Florida was a turning point. Do you feel like sometimes you take a step forward, a couple steps back in progress?
Absolutely. It often happens, and wherever there is continuing systemic racism, there's always resistance to it. But we've seen over history that systemic racism can readapt. Even as we change laws and policies, it can come back with a vengeance. So our schools are just about as segregated as they were back during segregation, before deseg. So we absolutely see ways that progress can be a slow march, but is absolutely urgent and important.
David Dwight's predecessor as executive director and lead catalyst, Yinka Faleti, held a series of town hall meetings organized by Forward Through Ferguson in 2018. Their purpose was to report on the progress or lack of progress made in the 3 years after the release of the original findings of the Ferguson Commission. That body was appointed by then-Governor Jay Nixon to study the social and economic conditions standing in the way of equality. Today, Forward Through Ferguson advocates for racial equity by helping institutions throughout the region end systemic racism by implementing systemic change. When people think of Forward Through Ferguson, they think of you in terms of the report. Mm-hmm. I don't think they know much about the scope of your work.
Sure.
So if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, so we think about that report as a pathway, right? It paints forward 189 calls to action, 189 first steps that institutions, organizations, businesses, neighborhoods can take up to address our deep racial inequities. But that report alone is just a wisdom, right, in a container. And so the Ferguson Commission, learning from history and the way there have been so many commissions that came after the killing of Black people, they saw a pattern of it waning. And so they said, we want to create some continuing infrastructure, an organization that can bring with it the legacy of all those community members who put their life and soul into that report and those recommendations, and to actually figure out what that looks like in practice. How do we turn this wisdom into actual change in policies and practices and laws that have real impacts for people of color and Black people, especially across this region? And so that's what we're here to be. We're not the education teacher who has 40 years in the field. We're not an expert in housing who's been working for justice there for many years, but we do carry with us this wisdom around racial equity, around community processes, and how we can really leverage that towards transformation, not just incremental change.
So your work continues. Explain how it will continue in the coming years.
Absolutely. So we have this vision. We know that St. Louis has never experienced racial equity, right? Since our founding and even the founding of the country, United States, systemic racism has been the status quo. And so it's really important that we're radically imagining a different St. Louis, right? One that we've never lived in, but is no less important. And so we call that vision 2039, 25 years, a generation after the killing of Michael Brown. What new ways could our society be showing up for all of its citizens, erasing the ways that Black citizens have been subjugated, and also other races as well, Latinx populations, Arab populations in St. Louis. And so we say that there's actually an equation for how we can achieve this. There are steps that we can take that will get us to that future. And so we think first, we have to have policy and systems wins. It's unacceptable that so few calls to action from the Ferguson Commission report have actually been implemented, and we need our leaders to do that. So that's a huge area of our work, advocacy. Second, we need a culture and practice of equity, right? We need to be moving away from the past ways that we set up our institutions and our lives towards one that centers equity. Third, we need to sustain the work. We need to invest in the people and the money that it's going to take to change things. There's been 100 years of disinvestment into the North Side. It's going to take a lot of reinvestment to right some of those wrongs. It has to be led by people most directly affected by the issue. So that's like that people capital, that pipeline. And we hold that if we can live into those three things, then that racial equity future, that dream, is not just something that's fanciful in our imagination, but is something that we can tangibly get towards.